This is episode 5 of In the Know, presented by Alpine Pursuit. 5% of all sales donated to conservation efforts right here in British Columbia. On this week's episode, I'm going to talk about recreating on Crown land in BC and what your rights are, or lack thereof, hint hint, when it comes to hunting, fishing, and general outdoor recreation on Crown land. If you stay until the end, I'm going to touch on a recent attack on BC's conservation officers from an anti-hunting and trapping organization and how you can get involved without barely lifting a finger. Stay tuned. All right, episode 5. It's been a minute between me being busy with family life and Ty and Wasey slaying goats. It's been a while since we've gotten an episode put out, so I apologize for missing a couple weeks. Ironically, it was right after the episode that I recorded saying that I was going to try to do one every week, but maybe I shouldn't have made that declaration right before hunting season started. So it is what it is. Here we are. Hope that everyone had an awesome Labor Day long weekend by the time this episode gets put out. And I want to thank everyone who's reached out with positive feedback regarding these little mini pods that I've been doing. It's been a blast doing them, and I've enjoyed digging into these topics and learning more myself, along with you guys, hopefully anyway. Hopefully one or two of you out there is getting something out of them. And if not, maybe they're boring as shit. That's fine too. And if you don't want to listen to them, just go ahead and hit that next button. You're certainly not going to hurt my feelings. So this week, I'm going to talk about the public's right to access Crown land for recreational purposes in British Columbia. And I use the term right loosely because unless you're First Nations, you don't actually have the right to access Crown land in BC in the sense that most people think they do. So let's start out. There's a few pieces of legislature and policy that govern the access to Crown land in BC. These include the Land Act of BC, the Canadian Navigable Waters Act, which is basically the federal law that governs navigable waters across the country. And most importantly, in this case, is BC's land use policy. So off the top, let's get rid of the Canadian Navigable Waters Act. Let's get it out of the way because it's pretty dry. It basically just lays the legal foundation on a federal level to access, navigate navigable waters. It's a tongue twister, but basically lakes and rivers. This act also talks a lot about federal law regarding building infrastructure on or near navigable waters and a whole lot of other stuff that doesn't really pertain to us as hunters and anglers accessing Crown land. But so that, you don't really need to know anything about it other than if you are interested, it basically just gives us the legal framework for that. So getting into the public's access of Crown land on land, more specifically, the Land Act of BC is the provincial legislature that lays the legal framework with the goal of protecting Crown land. And I notice I said goal because on several occasions it has failed to do so. The Land Act is what regulates all activities that take place on Crown land. That includes, I believe anyway, that includes like people applying for extracting resources and stuff like that. There's other legislature involved there as well. But so yeah, if you were listening earlier, you would have noticed me mention that BC residents don't actually have the right to access Crown land in BC, which it seems weird, but it's true. Legally, it's true. The Land Act, Section 60, states this: a person commits an offense if the person does any of the following: occupies or possesses Crown land without lawful authority, uses Crown land without lawful authority, and then it goes on to say constructs a permanent structure, enclosure, does excavating, digging, blah, blah, blah. But A and B there are the I guess the main ones that that pertain to this. So occupies or possesses crown land without lawful authority, or uses crown land without lawful authority. Basically, to simplify this, it's illegal to go onto crown land or to possess or to do anything with crown land without lawful authority. For the purpose of simply just accessing crown land, this is about the extent of what you need to know out of the Land Act. There's other stuff in there that's interesting, but it's really all you need to know in terms of this. Now, so we've gotten rid of the Canadian Navigable Waters Act. We've gotten rid of the Land Act. The only thing we have left here is what's called BC's land use policy, which basically takes the first two that I mentioned. It takes those and prescribes how they're applied basically in BC. So the BC's land use policy provides a blanket permission, which they call a bear license, to use crown land for recreational purposes. This bear license applies to all Canadians, non-Canadians, so long as you abide by the terms of the land use policy. This is where it gets interesting, I think. The land use policy states, Section 7, if you care, appropriate use. The permission requires the public to abide by the following conditions. Activities must abide by and comply with all applicable laws, regulations, and bylaws. So basically, you can't break any law, regulation, or bylaw while you're on crown land. Activities are undertaken in a safe and healthy manner. No permanent structures or buildings are allowed on the land. Campfires are undertaken in a safe manner as per Flynn Rowe's Guide to Campfires, blah, blah, blah. And obviously, if there's a fire ban, you can't have a campfire. Activities must be undertaken in a manner which does not negatively impact the environment. This is huge. And wildlife, including the removal of all garbage and materials brought onto the land as part of said activities. And lastly, the enjoyment of other crown land users is respected. So it goes on to also talk about like what you're allowed to do, like rock climb, hike, boat, water ski, bird watch, horseback ride, blah, blah, all these. And then it does specifically mention for hunting and fishing and fossil collection. You also obviously have to abide by the hunting and trapping regs, freshwater fishing regs, and the fossil collection regs, I guess. But yeah, so basically to clarify what this means, this permission, or bear license as they call it, is only valid if you abide by these provisions. So that also means that if someone litters or dumps garbage, they're legally forfeiting the privilege to access crown land. If someone has a campfire during a fire ban, if let's say you, on the last section there where it says the enjoyment of other crown land users is respected. So if you're being a dick, aka harassing hunters and anglers, the same thing applies. You're forfeiting your legal right or your legal privilege to access crown land. Those that don't know, it's also, side note here, it's also a criminal offense to obstruct someone lawfully engaged in hunting, trapping, or fishing under the Wildlife Act, which I would assume that's the route that it would go if that ever happened anyway. They would just charge you under the Wildlife Act as opposed to saying you're not allowed to access crown land anymore. But nonetheless, it's super interesting that they have it laid out like that. To clarify, personally, I've never heard of someone losing their privilege to access crown land for violating stuff like this. My understanding, like I said, is normally you'd get a ticket or criminally charged, and that'd be the extent of it. However, it's just something that I find super interesting. I honestly had no idea about this until probably like a year ago. I stumbled upon it while researching some other random policy on Crown land usage. So another thing to note is that the land use policy is also what allows us as anglers to navigate the shores of a river below high water mark, or lake for that matter, below high water mark, even when there's private property on both sides adjacent to the river. Something I've done before on several occasions. Down here in the Lower Mainland, it's a big issue on the Vetter. Probably one of the busiest fisheries in the Lower Mainland for the fall salmon run. You will not get through a season down here without hearing of some type of conflict between a property owner and an angler. Property owners don't like the sight of seeing 30 people lined up on the shore right outside their back door, I guess. But that's the law. And this is where we get the right to do that. So I hope that someone could take something away from this. For anyone that wants to learn more about any of these, it's all fairly readily available on the internet. I'd encourage all hunters to also read through the Wildlife Act. I know a lot of people just read the regs. I myself have been guilty of that. My first couple years hunting in BC, I just read the regs and was like, okay, this is what I need to do. But there is stuff in the Wildlife Act that isn't in the regs, and it's our responsibility as hunters to know that and be up to date on that as well. So before I leave you guys, I want to touch on something that was originally brought to my attention through the Hunter Conservationist Instagram page. So thanks to Mark and Curtis Hall for bringing this to light. There was recently an attack on the BC Conservation Officer Service from an anti-hunting and anti-trapping group called the Fur Bearers. This group, they filed a complaint to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy regarding the euthanizing of problem bears. And I'm going to read a little blurb from what Mark and Curtis wrote. So the authenticity of the complainant's reported facts and interpretation of events should be considered suspect and misleading. The BC Court of Appeal has previously determined that killing wildlife is not a routine action taken by officers, which makes this complaint without merit. Black bears are healthy and abundant in BC, and out of the 20,000 plus bear complaints the BC Conservation Officer Service receives each year, around 97 to 98% of those complaints do not result in the bear having to be destroyed. This is a testament to the great problem-solving work that the conservation officers do. So, yeah, this same group, that's just a very small blurb. The whole thing is on howl.org, which I'll get to in a minute here. But the same group is also calling for a public oversight group on the field decisions of conservation officers, which is an absolute disaster waiting to happen, if you ask me. They want to bring in people who have zero training or experience dealing with wildlife or dealing with people from a law enforcement perspective, because my understanding is they want this public oversight group to just be a blanket oversight group for all field decisions, not just the field decisions that result in destroying an animal. So you're going to bring in these people that have zero experience dealing with people or wildlife from a law enforcement perspective and have them decide whether these actions are justified or not. The actions of COs that are trained, have extensive training, probably honestly, like some of the highest trained law enforcement, highest trained starting out in their career anyway, because it's my understanding that BC conservation officers, I'm pretty sure you need a university degree to be hired. Whereas like RCMP, you just need a high school education. So, but yeah, I mean, this would be an absolute train wreck if you ask me. This group is also extremely active on pushing the grizzly bear ban. and it is their mandate to end all trapping in BC. So once again, huge shout out to Mark and Curtis Hall from the Hunter Conservationist podcast and Instagram page. I'm fairly certain they're the ones that kind of spearheaded this and got everything to Howl for Wildlife. So Howl for Wildlife, for those that don't know or aren't familiar with the platform, basically Howl for Wildlife is a platform that you sign up, it's free, you make an account, and when stuff like this happens, I guess you could call it like a petition or whatever, but when stuff like this happens, they organize all of the like the MPs and all the politicians, and like right down to a local level. They get their contact information and email addresses and all that kind of stuff. And basically all you do is click a couple buttons, and it automatically fires off emails and letters to all the applicable politicians, and it like all from your name. And it just makes it super easy. It's stupid easy. It leaves us with zero excuses for not getting involved in stuff like this. So, yeah, thanks to Mark and Curtis for getting all the information to Howl and, yeah, taking this issue on. So far there's only been 189 actions taken on howl.org, which is absolutely pitiful. We're dealing with it. We're going up against, an organization, these fur bearer people. Like, these people are active, like they're passionate about this. And I mean, it's embarrassing how little amount of action we get from hunters, anglers, or people that support hunting and angling in BC when it comes to stuff like this. Like, we get walked on by these groups. So let's do our part. Let's get these numbers up. Let's push back on this issue a little bit. So yeah, huge shout out to Mark and Curtis. As always, if you've got any feedback, topics of interest, reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, Alpine Pursuit on both. You can also fill out the contact us form on our website, or drop us an email at alpinepursuit.bc@gmail.com. We'll leave the links, show notes for all that kind of stuff. We'll also leave the link in the show notes for the howl.org thing for that. If you want to support the, this little mini podcast and Alpine Pursuit in general, head over to our website and then check out some of our apparel, hats, stuff like that. 5% of all sales goes to the BC Wildlife Federation. If you want to support Wilderness Locals Pod, head over to Ty and Wasey's website. They've got some pretty sweet merch as well. So yeah, with that, thanks for listening, folks, and I will catch you on the next one.